All right, welcome back to another episode of the IMG series. And today I'm so excited because we have Dr. Farah joining us today. Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you, finally.
I know. So, just a bit of backstory for those who are going to be watching this. We were exchanging messages for a couple of weeks now, and because COVID's been so crazy and Farah's been super busy, it was hard to kind of nail down a date. Thankfully,
Yeah,
she's able to join me today, and I'm so appreciative of the time that you're giving us today to spend with
of course,
us.
no problem.
Okay, so Farah, I like to start off by asking all my guests if you could tell us a little bit about your background and where you are currently in your career.
Okay, so I actually was born in the U.S. and I lived a part of my life here, but majority of my education was in Dubai. So I did like my high school, my and all that in Dubai, and that's where I eventually ended up doing my medical school training. So I did my medical school in Dubai Medical College, and then I came to the U.S. and did my residency training in internal medicine. And now I'm practicing as an internal medicine attending. And for those who know it, I'm practicing as a hospitalist.
Yeah, and for those who don't already follow Dr. Farah on Instagram, she's one of the most realistic people on there and very honest, something which I find very refreshing. So I really appreciate all the posts. And the one that I look like, sorry, the dog. one thing I really look forward to the most during your posting is your IG stories, because you kind of document every now and then like what like I guess like what you're feeling at the time with that you
Yeah.
post it. So those are always fun for me. Um, so you said that you were born in the U.S. and then you did most of your medical training and high school in Dubai. Were there any plans to kind of pursue medicine in Dubai, or did you always have your heart set on the U.S.?
So, ironically enough, my dad actually wanted me to study like whatever I was planning to study in the US. So he really wasn't pushing me towards medicine. Like he didn't really care whatever I was going to choose, but he always wanted me to do like my undergrad and grad school in the US. So I always knew that at some point I was coming back to do part of my training in the US. And the main reason why I actually, so let me go back to why I decided to stay in Dubai. I
Sure.
decided to stay in Dubai because, first of all, I already got my acceptance in Dubai. I actually applied um, to Dubai just because I was living there and my mom really wanted me to stay in the country. And, so she said, why not just shoot your shot? You never know. And then when I got my acceptance, like literally, I walked out of the interview and they called me and they're like, we'd like you to come, like, we accept into our medical school. So my mom was like, so it's a guarantee. You can always do your residency training like in the US. So that's how I ended up staying. Like I actually, my baby brother was only 1 year old, and at that time I was like, okay, if I go early on to America, I'm gonna miss a huge chunk of like bonding with my family, and I will have no support system. I'm gonna be all by myself. So the pros versus the cons. The pros of staying in Dubai made much more sense. Um, the reason why I decided to come back, like for my residency training, is because at the end of the day, I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm sure like even if you're attending in whatever country, if you have so much experience and you're like 40 years old and you want to come back to the U.S. and work, they expect you to do your residency training all over again.
Exactly.
So I never know what's going to happen in the world. And I didn't want to be like 40 years old having to come back to the US and become a resident. Especially like when you're in your 20s, you still have that energy to do the USMLE, to study and do residency. I don't imagine myself doing that when I'm like so far in my career, going back, to being an intern.
Yeah, and that takes a lot of energy. Speaking of like being in your 20s and having the energy to kind of pursue the USMLEs, I'm currently studying for step one, and I have to say, it is a pain.
I
And
know.
I remember in one of your stories, you said something like, step one like sucks, something like that. And yeah, and when I saw that, I was like, yes, I feel like I'm not the only one who thinks that. But yeah.
Definitely. I honestly think like sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do to get to what you want in life, right? Like
Yes.
progress isn't gonna be enjoyable all the time. And for me, like sitting down and studying, I'm a very overactive person. So I find it so difficult to just sit down and study, and it's always so draining for me. So I don't like sitting down and studying, but you gotta do what you gotta do to get where you want, you know?
I can relate to that because like having to kind of, well, first of all, like I'm not from here. I'm in the US. I was from the Philippines. I'm from the Philippines. And so not having a car and having access to kind of transportation and kind of being stuck indoors, and just like you, I hate having to like sit in one place for an extended amount of time. It just drives me crazy. But you got to do what you got to do, as you said. Um, and so I guess maybe you can kind of explain how you would compare training in Dubai and training in the US.
So do you mean like medical school or like residency and
Yeah, just basically maybe what you picked up in Dubai when you were in medical school and how you can kind of compare it to where you are now.
so one thing that I've noticed, like because during my residency training, I did work with medical students who are obviously rotating through internal medicine over here. But the major difference is I feel like medical school abroad, there's a lot more time during their clerkships, during our clerkships at least. Like for me, internal medicine was like 5 months. And over here, like the students I worked with had 6 weeks of internal medicine, and I feel they're not actually getting a lot of time during the rotations. That's one thing that I've noticed. In regards to training, obviously residency training in Dubai is much longer. Well, it's 1 year longer. It's 4 years of internal medicine, and here in the U.S. it is 3 years. So so my husband actually did his residency in Dubai, so I know from him, like he had a lot more time during his rotations. Like he's gone and done hematology, oncology, for instance, for 4 months, which you don't do here in the U.S. Like you only go for like 3 weeks of electives on hem onc, for instance. So it's really different. I think they're both obviously pretty strong, but it's completely different. You can't really compare them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I had no idea because so in the Philippines, internal medicine is also 3 years for us, and I had no idea. In Dubai, I guess they kind of extend like your rotations just so you maximize.
Exactly.
Yeah, each rotation. I think that makes complete sense. And I guess we can move on to some of the questions that my followers sent in.
Okay.
And one had asked if you studied in Dubai, what are the requirements for practicing medicine in the US, if there's any like difference for other like IMGs?
So it's the same thing as any IMG applying. You know, as like my medical school was accredited, so that was not a big issue, and there isn't really any difference. You have to do the USMLE. You have to apply through ECFMG to get get your steps done and get your ECFMG certificate, and that's really it. There wasn't anything different.
Right. Um, and as an attending, what qualities do you look for and appreciate in the students that you mentor? Or if you don't mentor anybody now, what's something that you would want to look for?
So honestly, the main thing would be an interest to learn. I think a lot of students are always under the assumption that they should know everything, and like when the attending asks them a question, if they get it wrong, that's it. We're done with this rotation. They failed it. But we don't. I don't think anyone looks at that. You know, nobody expects you to know everything, especially as a student. Main thing would be punctuality. You know, being eager to learn, and if your attending asks you to read up a topic, just make sure you do read it. And yeah, that's really it.
And I saw you had posted one time because somebody had asked you a question on your Instagram story and asked like, what's the best way to kind of overcome like feeling bad about yourself if you're having a bad day at the hospital or things like that. And you said something about like knowledge is power, or like making sure that you like study even harder when you feel like you don't know something or you feel incompetent. Is that something that you think like really helps you on your bad days when you feel like you had a bad day at work or you weren't able to get like a certain diagnosis right?
So I'm back. I tend to read even at the job, even now as an attending. Like I can't tell you the number of times because I sit in the library area. I can't tell you the number of times where a case kind of like baffled me. I ended up opening Harrison's if I couldn't find them up to date. I think like nobody expects you to know everything. That's the main thing,
Exactly.
you know. It's just you need to know how to find an answer, right? Like, and the other thing is you have to always have that interest to learn, you know. Especially in internal medicine, it is so vast. There's no way that you will remember everything. So, as at least if reading something or seeing an abnormal lab sparks something in your mind that makes you go search for it, that's kind of the main thing that you need to do, kind of to strengthen yourself. And the reason I say that the more you read, the more stronger you get as a provider is because you'll notice it with your practice. You'll become more confident. You're not having to go looking for answers for every single case. There'll be
Right.
like one out of your 20 patients where you have to actually go to up to date for an answer at the moment. So I think especially during your residency training, you'll notice that when your attendings have questions on the spot, you're immediately responding. So it kind of boosts your confidence.
Is you like, do you think it's safe to say that um being in medicine is kind of like a lifetime of learning? Like you said, we're not expected to learn everything, but we are supposed to like give ourselves that opportunity to learn every single day,
Mhm.
because internal medicine, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so intimidated by it, especially when I was a clerk back in medical school, is because just knowing that it's so broad, it's such a broad specialty. And so, and plus medicine is always like, is constantly evolving. There's always so many things that we discover on a daily basis. So having to kind of like constantly tell ourselves, because I think we're so good at being so hard on ourselves right now, and then we kind of like expect ourselves to be this certain level of perfect every single time. So I like that you pointed that out, that you really have to kind of, I think, give yourself some grace when you're,
Exactly.
yeah, when you're having a bad day. And like you said, even as an attending, you have moments where you get baffled. Um,
And there are moments where like I'm pretty hard on myself. So there are
Same.
times I there are times where I'd actually go to my husband and I'd be like, where's this new medication? How come I didn't know about this? I'm so upset. And he's like, you do realize these people like did a fellowship in cardiology and that's the only
Right.
thing they do. So they should know
Right.
this. You're not expected to know everything.
I'm
So,
the same way.
you know,
Yeah, but yeah, I guess it really happens to everyone, and we have to be like more open to not knowing things.
yeah.
um so somebody had asked, when would be the best time to book step one, you think, in your opinion?
Uh, Honestly, I think it is smart to start studying step one. Like, if you knew from the beginning of like your medical school training that you wanted to pursue the USMLE and come to the US, it'd be super smart to get it done and out of the way once you're done with your preclinicals, because it's the same thing that we're studying, but it's more, you know, it's all in one exam instead of like being divided into separate exams. So that knowledge is kind of still fresh in your head. So
Right.
if you have that opportunity to get it done just straight out once you're done with your preclinicals, I think that's super smart. It's really hard to go back. Like for me, I did during my intern year, and that was like 5 years after, you know,
Oh
I
my,
started.
yeah.
So it, a lot of stuff had to be relearned, kind of, you know.
I know, it's like having to go through med school in such a compressed amount of time, and that
Yeah.
for me is torture. That's what I'm dealing with at the moment. um, on the subject of the USMLEs, how can non-US IMGs, or even US IMGs, optimize their application with a B1 visa? I know you're a US citizen,
Yeah.
but based on your experience, what do you think would be the best way to kind of optimize?
So one thing, so a B1 visa is just a visitation visa. So
Right, that's a, yeah, tourist visa.
I'm guessing they're talking about getting like clinical experience.
Right.
So if you're able to get any US clinical experience, do some observerships or clerkships in the US, then obviously that way you can obviously build connections and you can get letters of recommendations from US physicians, and that can help boost your application. Some people also would recommend coming over and doing a year of research or a
Right.
research fellowship, and that can obviously boost your application as well, you know?
Right. And on the subject of US clinical experience, I had a follower ask me, she said, I remember Dr. Farah mentioning about not necessarily having USCEs or US clinical experience in order to match. So I wonder, in such case, what else can applicants do to achieve the same goals of USCEs? I guess getting LORs, but not necessarily having to go through US clinical experience.
So like from American doctors?
Yeah, so obtaining letters of recommendations, but not necessarily having to go through like observerships or things like that. Do you think like research is important, or working as like a medical assistant would help?
Yeah, so any experience where you get to work under a physician, I guess, like as a medical assistant, that can possibly help. The other thing is research obviously helps. You get both the letter of recommendation and you get the research experience on top of that. But I think really the main thing is knowing what you're applying to. You know, if you know, like from the beginning, for me, for instance, I knew I was applying to internal medicine. So I knew it is not one of the most competitive specialties. I had actually two friends who were coming to the US and were applying, doing US clinical experience and research as well. They took like a 2-year gap and did that.
Wow.
And they did that big programs. We did a Mayo Clinic, and I decided whatever money they were going to spend in that 1 year, I was just going to apply more broadly and
Right.
not have any gap, because I got my medical degree in 2015. I applied in 2015, so I had like 0 gaps. So obviously it worked because I actually knew what I was applying to. I knew what like how competitive IM is. It's not really one of the most competitive. Plus, you need to remember, like I applied in 2015. Every year, it's getting harder.
Right.
So that's why we keep saying, like, if you can get the clinical experience, that's great. Even if you're just applying for IM, if you can get the research experience, that's also just going to help boost your application.
Absolutely. And I think, would you say, is it safe to say that programs want to know that as an international medical graduate, you kind of have an idea as to like how the US health system runs, and just to kind of get an idea of what it's like, what the system is like?
Definitely, I think it helps. I think a lot of them also want to make sure that you've worked with like electronic medical records, and you kind
Right.
of there's a huge culture difference as well, at depending on where you're working. So I think that having that clinical experience in the US kind of shows that you've kind of gotten over that barrier.
Right. And since you mentioned gaps, talking about kind of like red flags and I guess like weaknesses, according to like one of the followers had asked me, as an attending, can you share some insights and advice on how attendings view these gaps or these red flags?
So unfortunately, but nobody wants to hear that you took a year gap just because medical school was too tough and you wanted to rest. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there are people who I don't really consider them gaps if you were actually working or doing something.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, for instance, my husband was doing his residency training in Dubai in internal medicine. So when he applied to the US, he was just finishing his residency there. So it was kind of 4 years away from his graduation, but it wasn't really a gap because he was actively in contact with patients.
Right.
You know, so that's really the main thing I've told people, even people I know in my personal life. like make sure that you have that patient experience, because people don't want, like programs want to make sure that you're still actively in the medical
Right.
field, you know?
Right.
So there are some people who message me and tell me they haven't like practiced medicine in 5 years, and that's kind of, you know, like a red flag. Like you've been so far away, and now you're studying for the steps. Your knowledge might be unfortunately weaker, and you haven't had that experience, so you kind of have to do more. So those are the people who need to do the research, who need to do the clinical experience, even if they're just applying for like the non-competitive specialties like family medicine, internal medicine, and so on, just because they're already, you know, they have so many
Right.
jobs and stuff.
Right. So would you think that, so I guess like having something substantial in between the time that you graduate medicine up until the time that you start applying to residency, do you think volunteer work would also count as something that is substantial in the application?
Yes, definitely. So I actually know people who were volunteering either as Doctors Without Borders or with the Red Cross or so on. But you know, you're actively doing something,
Right.
right? So that's obviously that wouldn't be a red flag in my opinion. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And as IMGs, do you think that we are treated differently? Like if there's, you know, some kind of discrimination, and if there is, how do you deal with it or how do you avoid it?
So for the most part, I haven't experienced any discrimination. I think there are some attendings who have, especially like the older attendings, that's
Right.
really it. They have this idea that the education abroad is so inferior.
Ooh,
So um
that's horrible.
yeah, but that's like 1 out of 10 attendings maybe, you know
Right.
what I mean? And they wouldn't really say it in your face, but I don't really feel like people like discriminate just because you're an IMG. I haven't personally experienced. I went to a program that had a lot of IMGs as well, and I didn't personally see any, you know, discrimination. Plus, I think like there's so many IMGs nowadays
Right.
that it's kind of the norm, you know?
I guess you I guess it's more of the old-fashioned attendings and those who are a little close-minded that are a little judgmental of IMG somehow.
Yeah. I had
And yeah,
actually, I had recently a program director tell me like they just got their first, like this year they had 2 IMGs part of their program, and they've never had that before. And he was like so impressed how they're stronger than
really?
candidates. Yeah. So
That's
he was,
amazing. Go IMGs.
so yeah, like even you know, there's so many of us nowadays, like I said, so
Yeah, it's
yeah.
definitely the numbers of like the number of IMGs who are applying are definitely increasing. And I think that's a good thing because I feel like we all have something unique to offer to the US health system. And I think so moving on to like I feel like what is currently the $1 million question. What are your thoughts on the whole step 2 CS cancellation?
Oh God. So, you know, here's the thing. I have two thought processes. I'm always with the mentality of you gotta do what you gotta do to get to your goal, right? So like
Yes.
if I had to do those pathways, like I did this CS obviously, but like if I was like now applying and I had to do the pathways, I'll immediately start figuring out which pathway works for me.
Right.
But at the same time, do I agree that IMGs have to be doing like these extra exams or, you know, so on? Not really. Especially like I agree with the step 2 CS being canceled because
Right.
it's kind of a ridiculous exam. Especially, I don't know if in your medical school you did OSCEs. We did it with like
Yes. And I
actual
took step 2 CS as well. So,
okay.
yeah.
So like and like in my medical training we had actual patients,
Right.
actual findings, and that like the CS was so silly in my opinion, you know, just a waste of money, especially coming all over from Dubai, booking a hotel and paying those expenses. So I think it's a good idea it got canceled. And when I read the usmle.org's website, they
Right.
actually said that they didn't think that it was needed because they'll incorporate more clinical scenarios in step 1 and step 2 CK, and then again there's virtual cases in step 3. Like I'm not sure if you know anything about step 3, but it's 2 parts.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yes.
So the exam is 2 days, not 2 parts. It's 2 days.
Yes.
And the second day is just virtual cases. Like you literally manage a patient virtually. So why are you making the art like IMGs have to go through this process?
Exactly. And I think I had a lot of friends whom I met while we were kind of preparing for Step 2 CS here in the US. Obviously IMGs as well. And a bunch of them had failed because they failed the English portion of it. And I feel like, and that was such a huge, a huge blow on their self-esteem, because these are physicians in their home countries. And the reason they fail is because they're unable to communicate proper English. But when we would converse, there was nothing wrong with their English. It's either they were like flustered, or they had an accent, or somehow their English was a little broken, but then still very much easy to understand. So yeah.
That's why some people were calling it a racist exam to begin with,
Right, I heard about that.
There's also the fact that it's a typing, I still always go from my experience.
Right.
So my husband finished his internal medicine training and then did the CS, in Dubai.
Right.
And for him, the major issue was the typing, the time typing. He's never had to sit down and type so quickly. So when we were practicing for the CS, all he was actually practicing is typing.
Right.
Not actual scenarios. So it wasn't actual, testing your clinical experience.
Right.
It was testing your English, your typing skills, which is kind of ridiculous,
Yeah. I remember. Yeah, I remember having to time yourselves to make sure that you typed a note. So in the Philippines, we write everything down. So it was also new for me when I had to I was like, oh my gosh, this is so strange having to type a note up. But yeah, I loved hearing your thoughts about the Step 2 CS, Farah. Just a couple more questions. Yeah, if you could go back in time, what are some of the things, if there are any at all, that you would want to change?
I think the main thing I would change is how hard I was on myself, I guess. Studying for Step 1 was the hardest for me. Step 2 CK was easy because I did it straight out medical school. So I had just finished my clinical IM exam and my surgery exam, and all I had to review was OBGYN and peds. So Step 2 CK didn't really take a toll on me. It was just, it's actually easier than Step 1, studying wise. But Step 1, I was always having a breakdown. I was
same.
I was always doubting myself. The more I studied, the more I felt like I forgot, which also just messed with my head a lot.
Right.
And especially as an IMG, I was the only person at that time I knew that was doing this. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really have blogs to look at, or Instagram, right, or anything where I could see so many people are actually doing the same process. So I was just really hard on myself, I guess. And I wish I would give myself more slack, or realize whatever I was going through was kind of normal, or it was okay to feel that way at that time,
Right.
You learn. And my sister is doing actually her steps, she finished medical school also in Dubai, and everything that I learned, I've tried to remind her. She's also went through the same thing, where she's doubting herself, and I had to be that's normal. Do a block of questions, you'll realize you didn't forget anything, So I'm glad that through my experiences, I've been able to help people on Instagram, or actual people I know in my real life. But
yeah, I can't imagine. I feel very lucky because so I started this journey of mine in 2019, and at that time also did not have anybody who was going on the same trajectory as me, did not have any friends from the Philippines who were on the same kind of pacing as me. So you're right in saying we're very lucky to have people like you who offers advice on how to get stuff done, because it's so hard. It's there's no handbook that tells you how to go through the USMLEs, from start to finish. And I love how you said stuff you think it's kind of bizarre how people charge for USCEs, and also kind of people who charge, like agencies who charge like how to guide IMGs to get into the US, because it's already so expensive. The process in itself is already so expensive.
And I have one more point about this. Like you
Yeah.
talked about the clinical experience. I like one thing I want everyone to know is everything is available online nowadays. Like I get so many questions about, hey, do you think about what do you think about this, for instance, US clinical experience website? Do you think it's
Right.
worth the money? Like I actually Google for like when you guys send me such questions, I end up Googling it and I find subreddits about these opportunities.
Right.
It's all available nowadays. Like people are talking, people are sharing their experiences. So like one thing is I highly recommend you guys do your own research if you have any questions, any doubts, or anything. Like I am always, and so many people, even you, like everyone's willing to help, but then again, there's only so much we know,
Right.
and not all of us have experienced everything. So it's always good to like look up other people's experiences, see if it relates to you or not.
I agree with you, because I think some people also find comfort, because I do a lot of research also on Reddit, and I like to see their kind of like reviews and stuff like that. I think the comfort in asking a figure like yourself comes from knowing that you, first of all, are a real human being, that they can actually see you, and that it's not just somebody behind the keyboard. And naturally, and for so many like good reasons, people trust your opinion and they respect you in that regard. And I think that's kind of the impact that you already have had on people like myself, and that's why I really wanted to talk to you today, Farah, because I think what you're doing is so amazing and so commendable. So lastly, what advice would you have for IMGs that want to go down the same kind of route as you?
um, One main thing is kind of trying to figure out what specialty you want to apply to from the beginning. Always make sure that you get strong USMLE scores. If you're able to get clinical experience during your studying, and that I highly recommend that, or if you can get research experience during that time, also I highly recommend that. I know some people, I've seen some people actually um, take a year off where they study and do their exams, and then take another year off where we're doing clinical experience.
Right.
If you can just kind of combine both together while you're studying, getting that clinical experience, getting to build those relationships over here in the US, and getting those letter of recommendations, then you're saving yourself more time and you're having less gaps in your application. And at the end of the day, I wish you guys like the best of luck, honestly. Like I honestly wish we all make it, because it is so exhausting. Like studying for the
Yes.
USC, I know how draining it can be. So I honestly wish everybody gets whatever they want.
Yeah, definitely. And guys, please follow Dr. Farah on Instagram. Seriously, her stories and posts are what I look forward to the most when I'm scrolling through Instagram, because it's always like I feel like somebody is like telling me like, "Hey, this is really hard, but you got this," and not having to like sugarcoat anything, which I love.
Thank you.
So you give the realest of advice, and I so appreciate that. Once again, thank you so much, Farah, for your time.
Thank you so
Uh,
much.
yes, I appreciate it. And I will see you guys again in the next episode.